So tonight I have the distinct privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, and I'm very honored to introduce to you Patnaik. Dave is the CEO of Jump Associates, which is a strategy and innovation firm, and works with some of the world's most admired companies, including GE, Nike, Target, and Virgin, just to name a few. They help companies create new businesses and reinvent existing ones. And they help them define profitable growth platforms in highly ambiguous spaces and build the systems, processes, and metrics that makes those platforms a reality. In recent years, Jump has become particularly well known for its pioneering culture and was named by the Wall Street Journal as one of the best places to work in America. Dave is a frequent speaker at business forums and has articles and appeared in numerous publications, including Business Week, Forbes, and Fast Company. So ladies and gentlemen, we are very lucky to have him here with us this evening, and please join me in welcoming Dave Patnaik.
Hold on. There you go. Good evening. How are you? Would you all do me a favor? Could you stand up, please? No human beings should sit for 2 hours on a stretch. It's just cruel. All right, yeah, and when you feel the blood getting back into your body, you go ahead and have a seat. Or it's a good time to slip out if you think this is going to go poorly. You could do that as well. I wouldn't know. I'll cry on the inside. Okay. I was so excited when I was invited by the Better Business Bureau to come to Chicago, because I'm on the board of another organization called Conscious Capitalism. And Conscious Capitalism, oh, we got a few Conscious Capitalists in the room. Conscious Capitalism's purpose, its stated goal, is to elevate humanity through business. And I think that that's something that the Better Business Bureau has been working to do for over 100 years. And so we share common cause with you. And so it is my privilege to be with you here today. I want to start with just a little bit of, I moonlight as a professor at Stanford. I should warn you about that first, which means that there's going to be a quiz. Here's a quiz. Ancient history. I want you to go back in time to a long, long time ago. I want you to think back to 2007, okay? And I want you to imagine in 2007, if I asked you who the big mobile phone manufacturers were back then, who the big cell phone device manufacturers were, who would you tell me? Yell them out. Nokia, Motorola, I heard. BlackBerry. Everybody forgets BlackBerry. I feel so bad for those guys, right? Woohoo! There's still someone using BlackBerries here. Oh my goodness. Okay, right? If I asked you that same question in 2010, who would you tell me? Apple, Samsung, and Google, right? These are the folks. Just think about that. In 3 years, it's not like one company ran into trouble. It's not like one company went out of business or 2 companies got acquired. The entire playing field changed. Right? Everyone was displaced in a matter of 900 days. Yeah. What should that tell you? The biggest takeaway from that is that the world is changing, right? And it's true not just for cell phone manufacturers. It's true across the world. Here are just some of the headlines we've been collecting over time. Right now, Tesla has a larger market cap than Ford. Right? Retailers are facing their own personal Armageddon while Amazon has launched drones to deliver packages to you. There's some good news out there, which is obesity rates among young children has actually dropped for the first time in a decade by 42%. Soda consumption is at a 30-year low. That may have something to do with the obesity rate. Right? And there's an interesting headline up there. It says that esports gamers are to be granted the same visa as other athletes. Show of hands, how many of you think that playing a video game counts as a sport? The thing is, it doesn't matter what we think because the State Department says they count as actual athletes. What's the big takeaway from there? The world is changing, right? And so why does that matter? Because as business leaders, we need to pay attention to change because companies that don't respond to change get fracked. Now, what do I mean by fracking? Fracking, we all know fracking, but I think it's a beautiful metaphor for what we're seeing going on in business today. Imagine that you're a farmer in Pennsylvania or Ohio, and you've been on that land for 100 years, and you do a pretty good job farming, but unbeknownst to you, somebody is breaking shale rock a mile underground underneath your farm, and suddenly there's all sorts of chemicals that are leaching up through the soil, and you wake up one day and you turn on your faucet, and your water light's on fire, and you have to move. You've been fracked, right? And we're seeing this all over the place where people's business models are getting fracked. We see folks who are getting fracked a little bit, they're getting fracked a lot. My colleagues and I at Jump, we started making a list, we called it the Fractal List. These were companies, over the left-hand side are companies that are totally fracked, right? Like BlackBerry and Blockbuster. And then there's folks who are getting fracked right now, and they're working hard to do something about it. McDonald's is working hard to try and put itself on the right side of history. And then there are folks who are fighting fracking, actively trying to take steps to do something so they don't get totally fracked. And then on the right-hand side are the folks who are doing the fracking. Those are the frackers. Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, all these guys. There's a little bit of a gap. You can see the people down at the bottom there, the Airbnbs and Fitbits. Those are the people we call the little frackers, right? People try to ignore the little frackers, but you need to pay attention to the little frackers because otherwise you'll wake up one day and there'll be big frackers and you too will be fracked. Right? This is a huge problem. So what do you do about it? How do you live through that? That list isn't even the most important fractal list. This is the list that really matters. How many of you have kids? Right? This is the fractal list I want you to pay more attention to. This is the one that is actually more salient to us. This countdown right here. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a scoreboard of some of the things that you should pay attention to, especially if you have children or, God forbid, grandchildren. Right? Everybody say 7. What's 7 on this list? Anyone? Yeah, you're right. 7 billion people on planet Earth, soon to be 9 billion. We're zooming right past 8 so fast we can't even count it. And the way we keep 7 billion people on planet Earth is we give most of the stuff to about 2 billion people, and the rest of the folks have to go pound sand. Everybody say 6. 6. What's 1 in 6? 1 in 6 people in the United States of America struggle with food insecurity. 1 in 6 people go to bed hungry depending on the night. Not in the Sudan, not in sub-Saharan Africa, but in the United States of America, we have that issue with food insecurity. Everybody say 5? 5,000 out of every people in the United States are incarcerated right now. That is a higher percentage of people in jail than any other country in the world. That's a higher number than the Soviet Union had under Stalin. That's a higher percentage than any apex civilization in the history of man. And we do it through things like 3 strikes out laws and a war on drugs that says like the first thing we need to do is lock them up. Everybody say 4? 4. What's 4? You all should know this one, right? That's right, global warming. 4 degrees, we thought that meant that that's how much hotter the planet would get by 2100. And then last year the UN came out and said, no, it's not 2100, it's 2050. And now they're saying, no, it's not 2050, it's actually in 11 years. Everybody say 3. 3. What's 3? This one's a tough one. 3 to 1? 3 to 1 is the number of suicides to homicides on planet Earth. Take all the people who were killed last night, right? And 3 times as many people took their own life. And when I mean homicides, I include war. So take everybody who died in Syria yesterday, take everybody who died in internecine warfare, and 3 times as many people decided to go gently into the night yesterday. What does that tell you? That tells you we don't just have a crisis of safety and security, it means we have a crisis of joy and meaning in the world. Everybody say 2? What's 2? 2 is the number of planets we need at the rate we're using it up, because it turns out that we're just using stuff too fast. And I'm going to have to change that 2 to 3 in about 6 years because China's still coming online, baby. Everybody say 1. All right, what's 1? What's 1? 1 is, for most of us in this room, how many lives we believe we have and how many chances we get at this. Not me, I'm Hindu, I believe in reincarnation, I'm coming back, baby. But for the rest of you guys, this is not a dress rehearsal. Right? This is your one shot to maybe do something about all this other stuff. This is your real fractal list. And this is why the Better Business Bureau really matters. This is the greater challenge for you. You all were started 100 years ago. And in the next century, to really know that you can both do good and do well, that these two things are not mutually exclusive, and that the two can actually come together. And this is what we're seeing in the world these days. We're seeing the rise of what we call purpose-driven companies, companies that are not just about shareholder return, not just about a bottom line, but actually about doing active good as part of their business enterprises. There's many of them out there in the world, if you look, folks like Whole Foods and Starbucks and Google that are actually trying to do things to actually change the world. In fact, a friend of mine, John Mackey, wrote a book a few years ago that many of you may have read called Conscious Capitalism, which is all about this idea that, in fact, you can do good and do well in the world if you set your intention right. Now, how do you do that? What does that actually even look like? The payoff, we know, is really great to it. This was an edgy idea when John first started thinking about this more than 15 years ago. But when we look at it now, we see that actually people actually trust companies that have that sense of purpose. I won't drag you through all the statistics. 79% of people are more loyal to purpose-driven brands. 73% are more willing to defend purpose-driven brands when they don't do the right thing. And 65% are more willing to forgive a company if it makes a mistake. I love what our previous speaker said, which is like mistakes will happen, but it's what you do with it along the way. And when you're fixing that mistake, will your customers come with you? And what we're finding over time is that these kind of purpose-driven companies are also not only doing well, they're not only doing good, they're doing well as well. Because people aren't just buying into things, or aren't just buying things, they're buying into things. They're buying into greater ideas. Now, I could show you all the analysis on this, but this is after dinner, so don't worry. We won't drag you through all the charts. But here's the thing. The shareholder return for purpose-driven companies is outstanding. And it is the three different bars that you see here. The first bar is the S&P 500. And the second bar is Jim Collins' Good to Great companies. And the third bar, the green bar, those are the purpose-driven companies. I can send you the slides afterwards if you want, but trust me, that's a huge difference. It's about an 18x difference in terms of shareholder return. This sort of outsized performance, doing well while you're doing good, is something that everyone is starting to take notice of. Last year, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, made a statement. Now, Larry Fink is he heads up one of the largest private equity companies in the world. And he basically said, hey, I've got a big idea, which is it's not just about shareholder return. We actually have to think about the benefit that we're providing to all of our stakeholders. So this isn't just some hippies on the coast, like me, saying it. But it's people at the cutting edge of capitalism that are saying we have a greater place in the world that we need to start paying attention to. So what does that look like? How do you do that? Well, what we found is there's actually 5 different aspects of really being a purpose-driven company. And you can play this game at home as a Cosmo quiz for yourself to say, how purpose-driven are we? Right? Which is, we see that purpose-driven companies have a sense of activated purpose. They know why they're in business. They have an aligned culture. They know all of their people are working together, creating behaviors we can count on and expect. They have a stakeholder orientation, more than just customers. They're more than just shareholders. They have an engine for building next-level leaders. And most importantly, they have a future focus. They're looking just beyond just this quarter or this year. Right? This idea of activated purpose is something that we've known for a long time. Howard Schultz said it best, the CEO of Starbucks. He said, you really have to think about, is there a greater cause that you are working for that is more than just yourself? That is more than just your company. I remember the first time I was asked to spend some time with Starbucks. And part of that, I went to their national conference where all of their store managers got together in Houston. This was, several thousand people. And I remember walking into the expo, into the conference center. And as I walked in, I was dressed like this. I didn't look like I was, like I fit in at Starbucks. And 3 random people came up to me and said, hey, do you know where you're going? You okay? Do you need anything? I was like, no, I'm good. I'm just going for a meeting. Like, okay, great. And I kept on walking down the hall. And then 2 more people said, hey, you know where you're going? Are you okay? I'm like, I'm fine. They're like, do you need it? Are you thirsty? I'm like, no, I'm good. I kept walking. I was like, no, I'm good. I'm fine. I walked another 5 steps. They were like, hey, no, I'm good. I started to feel like a salmon swimming upstream from too much care coming at me, right? And this isn't something that was part of a procedural manual that every Starbucks employee has to ask people, are you okay? Do you know where you're going? It is just part and parcel of who that company is. And the reason for it is super simple. If you go to your local Starbucks, right, you can do this tomorrow. Go talk to the store manager and just say, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about where you're from. And here's the story I've heard over and over and over because I've asked so many of them. When they start talking about how they grew up, they start to say things like, yeah, you know, I grew up super poor. My mom was a single mother. She worked 2 jobs. And I had to take care of my little brother. And as my mom would work 1 job, she'd come home, and then she'd like cook dinner for us. And then before she went out to her 2nd job, she'd turn to me and say, hey, I'm going out for the 2nd job. Take care of your little brother. It's important. Right? And it turns out Howard Schultz, the founder, was exactly the same way too. He grew up a poor kid in Canarsie, Queens in the projects. Starbucks didn't teach them that the most important purpose in life is to care about other people. Life taught them that, and that's why they work at Starbucks. So the first point on our Cosmo quiz is, do you have a greater purpose beyond yourself? Not something that your company's advertising agency came up with, but something that life taught you, and that's why you're all there working in it together. If you are, give yourself a point. Second thing is aligned culture. Right? You have to have that sense of everybody working together. There's no greater example of this than Southwest Airlines. Anybody fly Southwest Airlines? Right? Great company. Herb Kelleher knows exactly why he's in business, and he says, you know, the thing that you can't copy about us is the level of devotion and enthusiasm and joy that our teams bring to every flight. You know, like those flight attendants, they get up there and they start telling jokes, you know, on the plane, they make all sorts of silly remarks. You can't fake that. You can't put that into an employee manual. See, if you tried to do that, if you tried to turn it into a policy, it wouldn't work. It turns out that human beings are generally lousy at being robots, right? We're not good at it, but we are excellent human beings if you give us a chance, right? And so thinking back, do you have a clear set of values of like, look, these are the 5 or 7 things that matter to us most, and show up in that way. And even if you're one of our salespeople and you make tons of money, but if you don't operate according to our values, you have to leave the company and we'll take the financial hit. Do you have that level of integrity so that everybody inside this culture knows what we can expect from you? That's how you get an aligned culture. If you have that, give yourselves a point. And thirdly, it's stakeholder orientation. Anyone know where this Whole Foods is? Englewood. Englewood, right? Whole Foods, you know, everybody, you know, Whole Foods candidly started out as being a thing for, you know, rich white folks in the suburbs, right? That's why we joke about calling it a whole paycheck. And at some point, they realized that, you know, they actually have a greater cause than just themselves or their shareholders or the people inside their stores. And they started to branch out to go to places like Englewood or inner city Detroit. They said, like, you know, there's all sorts of food deserts in the country that don't have the kind of access to healthy food that we can provide. So they started to build stores in these neighborhoods. And here's what they found. Number one, there's a real need for it there because people need to eat healthy. Number two, if they actually engage with the local community, and by local community, I mean local churches and pastors and leaders on the ground, said, hey, we would like to come to your neighborhood. Is that okay with you? Right? What they found was they could actually engage the people who were there. It turns out also that the rents are a lot cheaper in many of these neighborhoods too. So they could actually, their costs were a lot lower. And then they turned around and passed on that lower cost to their customers in the form of lower prices. Now, did it help customers? Yes. Did it help shareholders? Absolutely. Did it help the community? Absolutely. Did it help their greater sense of purpose? Yes. And they're not choosing between any of their different stakeholders. They're doing it on a win-win basis. And that's why when John Mackey wrote Conscious Capitalism, that notion that he started off very quickly, he said, look, we have a myth in the United States. We have come to believe that shareholder return is everything, that there's only one group of people that matters. And in fact, that's only true if your brain can't handle complexity. But for most of us, we ought to be able to be smart enough to do right by our customers, by our shareholders, by our suppliers, by the people in our community all together. That's a stakeholder orientation. And if you think your company, if you think your management teams have that kind of stakeholder orientation, give yourselves another point. Next level leadership is an interesting thing, right? It's one thing to have a great leadership team. How many of you have a great leadership team? Be proud. Say, yeah, like I love my leadership team. I'll raise my hand. I love my leadership team. Good. Now the second question though is, do you have an engine for leadership? Are you building the kind of company that if I join your company when I'm 25, I have a higher likelihood of being a CEO or a senator or a leader in my community when I'm 55? Are you building that kind of engine for leadership? That's what we're looking for, right? To like whatever level you're at, you're going to the next level beyond that. You know, one of the places I find as a beautiful example of this is Netflix, right? Many of us have Netflix accounts at this point, right? That company should have died like 9 times, right? I mean, they started their business. They thought they were actually going to like sell you DVDs, and then a year later they discovered that nobody wanted to buy the DVDs. They want to rent them, so they had to pivot quickly. And then they're like, okay, well, we're going to do it, but then like maybe we need to build a separate box for you, and no one had wanted the hardware. And then they switched. They said, like maybe we'll find a way to stream it over the web. And then YouTube came out, and that almost put them out of business. And then the movie studio said, we don't want to give you any movies. So they're like, well, forget it. We'll start making our own TV content. That company should have died, by my count, 10 times. That's more than your average cat. Right? And the only thing that's keeping them going, as far as I can tell, is this engine for leadership. They have extreme freedom and extreme accountability like no company I've spent time with. It's fascinating. If you have a big project and you're at Netflix, you bring it in front of Reed and Ted, the founders, you bring it in front of their leadership team and you say, here's what I'm doing. And it's the weirdest meeting ever. All the 10 people on the leadership team, they argue back and forth. Oh, you should totally do it. That's a great idea. And someone says, that's a stupid idea. I would never do it. And the third day, well, I would watch out for this. And at some point, one of their leaders says, well, that's what we think, but it doesn't matter what we think, it's your call. Off you go. That's an insane level of autonomy, right? Reed Hastings, then the CEO, he just spends all of his time developing his leaders. He has somewhere in the neighborhood of, last count, about 100 vice presidents, and Reed spends 1 hour, one-on-one, with every single one of those vice presidents once a quarter. He spends a half an hour with every one of his directors twice a year, and he's got a couple of hundred of those. And when you ask him, like, how do you do it? How do you have time to have 100 one-on-ones every quarter? He's like, I'm not in any of the meetings where they make the decisions. They decide that on their own. I spend time working on them, and then they work on the business. So if you have that kind of engine, and I don't just mean a training program, but if you actually are building those kind of next level leaderships, give yourselves a big whopping point. And finally, do you have a future focus? Are you thinking about what's going on in the future? Larry Page, the CEO of Google, talks about this all the time. He says, when I look at the difference between companies that made it and the companies that didn't, the companies that got fracked, he said the biggest difference was those companies that died, they missed the future. They weren't paying attention. And he said, even for me, it was super hard. He said, I remember when we were starting our mobile operating system, Android, I would go in there every Friday afternoon, and I would spend 3 hours with the team just to help them do it. And he said, I felt so guilty, because I know all of our business comes from advertising. I should be spending time with the ad guys. He's like, no, but I got to pay attention to the future. I got to figure out where this is going, down the road. And he spends most of his, time now just thinking about the future. This is super hard for most of us, right? Because what the neuroscience tells us about this is that most of us are not future-focused at all. Like, you can test people on this. There's a guy at Stanford who's come up with a good test for this. It turns out that about 15% of us are future-focused, right, just by nature. And when you show things like the Fractal List to them, people say, like, those future-focused people, they go, you got it, you're right, we need to get going on this. Right? There's another 13% of the population or so who are very past-focused. Right? The other people and it's in their brain wiring. They look at a chart like that and they go, Dave, the world's not changing. Taxi cabs will never go away. Come on, who's going to take Uber, right? I don't mind those people. You know, that's okay because you can work on them a little bit. The 70% in the middle, they're the folks who are present focused, right? That's most of humanity's present focus. And when you show them a list like that Fractal List, you know what they say? They say, Dave, you're exactly right. The world is changing, but we need to focus on this quarter. And that's actually the worst of all three options. Because think about it, you're talking like a future-focused person and you're acting like a past-focused person. At least with the past-focused people, I can prove you're wrong. With the future-focused people, you're on your way. What do we do about the present-focused people? And the real challenge is most of us are present-focused. So the question is, do you, inside your company, do you have some habit, some practice to get you beyond this day? Get beyond this week, get beyond this quarter, so you too can stay aligned on what matters most, which is your purpose of why you're in business to begin with. Every single one of those things, an activated sense of purpose, an aligned sense of culture, a stakeholder orientation, a sense of next level leadership, and a relentless future focus. These are the things that we see in purpose-driven companies. Companies that are doing things beyond just making money today, but are achieving a higher sense of meaning, right? And we need it because the world is changing. You know, I was just in India 3 weeks ago. I was talking to a friend of mine. His name is Sunil. He has worked all his life in India, and he's worked really hard to put his kids through college. Both his kids came to the US, and they got into American universities. He was incredibly proud of them, right? Both of them got jobs in the US. He's so proud of them. And then about a month ago, his daughter called him from her job in New York. He's talked to her. He said, "How's it going?" And she said, "Oh, it's really good. You know, I'm going to quit my job." And he said, "Oh my God, what did you do? Why?" He said, "No," she said, "No, I'm not getting fired, Dad. I'm quitting my job." He's like, "What? Do you have another job?" She says, No, I don't have any job lined up." And to my friend Sunil, he said, "That's insane. Why would you do this? Slow down. Why do you want to quit your job?" And she works for a marketing agency. She says, "You don't understand. They have me working on this project right now where we're working with this company, and the CEO wants us to make him look really good in terms of sustainability. And I know because I've spent time with that company, they're all a bunch of liars. They just want to look good. They're not actually genuinely in it, and I don't want to be a hypocrite, so I'm quitting my job." She's like, "Oh my goodness." And the thing is, it's not just her, isn't it? How many of you have 20-something kids who think just like that? Right? That's the future, my friends. The world is changing whether we like it or not. It's like we are no longer just buying things, we are buying into things. And so he asked me, he said, "Dave, what should I do?" And I said, "You should do what you should do with any good, young, smart kid. Learn from them." Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. I love this organization.